Well, Cindy, let's start with a little bit about you. Where do you live currently?
Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we talked about that. You just moved.
Mhm.
Yeah. How is it so
Literally
far?
just moved. That's why there's all this junk and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. Virginia Beach is a nice town.
Mhm.
I've done quite a bit of fishing out of there, out in the Gulf Stream. Um, it's a nice place to visit. Um, I imagine
It's
it's a
a
nice
nice
place to
place
live
to live.
too. A lot of military there.
Yes, lots of
Yeah.
military.
And where did
Comfortable.
you grow? Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Sacramento, California.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. And brothers, sisters?
I had a brother who passed away at 60.
Hmm. And when you, what were you interested in as a kid growing up? Did you have hobbies or pursuits that took up your time, your energy?
Grew up at the ripe old age of 10.
Mhm.
So, and I had friends that died in the Vietnam War
When
as
you were
young.
10 years old?
Yeah, because my friends were all older.
Ah.
Yeah, I when I literally say that I grew up as an adult at 10 years old, everybody was older than me in my entire family. I'm the last one left, except for an aunt that's turning 100 tomorrow.
Wow.
um, but I grew up fast because of the times.
So when you were 10 years old, you had friends who were old enough to be serving and dying in Vietnam. Wow.
Two, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Mm.
And a family friend whose brother died.
So how did that change your outlook at the age of 10? Like, how could you even process that at 10?
Well, I was, I guess you could say I was a smart child at the time.
Mm.
Um, I didn't like what was happening, and when you lose someone very young at a young age, you learn about death very quickly. Because my best friend died when I was 4.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I grew up too fast. Everything was taken as an adult. I didn't have a childhood.
Mm.
I
So
was
when
involved
you,
in things.
sorry, say that again?
I was involved in volunteering and things of that nature back then.
Yeah, at a really early age, it sounds like. Yeah. So, when you became an actual adult, a legal adult,
Yes,
what did you do with all of that energy?
I went to work. I went
Yeah.
to college first at 17, found out that that just wasn't for me, and I went to work.
Yeah.
And, well, I actually lived with a man for 7 years before I met my second husband, or my first husband, John.
I gotcha.
And
Okay.
John was a war veteran.
Okay. And so just last question on your personal biography. Any military in your family? Did you grow up with military
My
folks?
my great grandfather was in World War One. No, my grandfather was in World War One. One of my uncles was in World War Two. Two of my uncles were in World War Two. My step grandfather was in Korea,
Hmm.
and I I was in JROTC and ROTC during the Vietnam era.
Gotcha. Okay. So you you had some intention maybe of serving in the military yourself?
I did, until I saw what happened when they came back from the war. Because I was young at the time, but I was still old enough to focus on what was happening.
Hmm. So tell me about meeting John for the first time.
Mhm. I went back to Sacramento State College, walked into a Denny's. At that time, they had like 2 booths at each side. And I looked at each one. There were 3 of them at the counter, and I picked John to sit next to out of the 3 other guys, or 2 other guys that were there. And I don't know, at the time I smoked, and I was looking for, I pulled out a cigarette, and this hand came over and lit my cigarette, and we just started talking, and I went home and told my roommate at the time I found the guy I'm going to marry.
Wow. So
One of these very decisive people.
yeah, sounds like it. Why? I mean, let's
I
talk
don't know
about
if
that.
he impressed me.
What made you sit next to him and not next to one of the other 2 guys?
He just looked like he was a little bit less. I don't know. He didn't look to me like somebody who you'd meet in a bar or type of thing or something. I just he was pretty good looking too.
Pretty good looking.
Mhm.
And so, as you got to know each other, what did you learn about him? Because I'm assuming that his Vietnam uh, experience was behind him at that point.
Yes, but not by long. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what did you learn
I
about
learned
him?
I learned that he also grew up fast, before. And I learned that, that he did have PTSD, and I knew that he did. Um, but just talking with him and that, the experiences that he went through, and that made me, I don't know how to describe it, but I have a psychology degree now. And it's just, he's the one that kind of kept me focusing in helping others. Because at first I just wanted to be a friend. We just started out as friends. And, it was just one of these things that I said, I don't normally give my phone number out, but here's my phone number. And it took a week for him to call me, type of thing. And I knew that he was hurting. I knew what he was going through in certain respects. He was also had gone through a divorce, and I had gone through a basic breakup of a boyfriend I'd been with a long time. And we just started out being friends and learning a bit about each other. Um,
Where did John grow up?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And what took him? And was he drafted? Did he volunteer? How did he end up in the military?
He did get drafted. He was in college, out of, actually, he was an orphan. And since I was adopted, we both had this kind of connection as being orphans together at one point. Um, his sister was in the ice capades, and his parents were both gone, and he went out to Southern California to live with his sister. So he was actually in Sacramento. He was in the same industry as my mother's side of the family, which was railroading at the time, and wound up in Roseville, California, where my mother was born.
And what year did he get drafted?
He went in 1966.
And which branch?
He was Army 5th Special Forces.
Special Forces.
Yes. In communications.
Mm-hmm. So he was drafted in '66, and presumably he went through some training and maybe some advanced training. Do you have?
Yes.
When did he go to Vietnam?
September or August of 1967.
And
And he was there till September of 1968. So right
okay.
through that.
So he did 13 months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is unusual for the Army, right? Isn't that usually a Marine thing?
I think that's what his DD 214 says. Maybe I'm mistaken,
It
but yeah,
doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
it might be September to August.
Sure, sure. Do you know where he was in Vietnam?
He was at various places, but he was on Nui Ba Din, which is Black Virgin Mountain, in the rice paddies of the Tay Ninh 3 Corps,
3 Corps. Yeah.
down by the Cambodia Parrot's Beak.
Hmm. Did he talk at all about things that he saw, things that he went through, or did
Oh gosh, yes.
really? Because a lot of guys won't.
Well, John was a pressure cooker, and that was part of the PTSD. He would see something on television that would set him off, and he would explode. And he was very verbal about all, you know, he could get very verbal against the world and against things. And it's hard to describe what that's like, but you and I could be having a conversation. He and I could be having a conversation just like you and I are. And something would set him off, and he would just, the anger would surface so quickly that you couldn't, you know, the best thing to do was to let him get it out. And he yelled explicits and things. I don't know what you want, but you know, what I can say. But he'd say, is this what the fuck I was fighting for? You know, these assholes over here and this, you know, and that would be why we didn't watch the news very much.
Yeah.
Um, when you're married to someone with PTSD, they isolate a lot. So you are their person to go, you know, to let it all out on.
Hmm. Yeah, you're the one who's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, and so had you seen this kind of behavior from him prior to marrying him, or is this something?
Yes, we did live together prior to getting married.
Yeah. So how did what was your strategy for dealing with it?
If I saw him start to pressure cook, as I call it, I would try to get him to let it out. Because once he let it out, then he was good at, you know, then it relieved him a little bit. You know, there were times when he would, to be honest, he drank a lot. So he would go into the bedroom and, you know, shut the door and drink and scream and yell. And I would just go out and, you know, just let him do it to get it out of his system. It does, if Paul had that same kind of war, because you know everybody's experience, I probably would not have remarried another veteran.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to be with John and go through it with John, and to, you know,
Was
I knew
there,
what I was getting into when I married him.
say that again?
I knew what I was getting into when I married him. I chose to be with him.
Yeah. Was there any part of your strategy that included medical or therapeutic help for John?
For me,
No, for John. Or,
for
or,
John,
or, or for you, I guess.
at the time, he wouldn't deal with the VA. You know, and back then, to be quite honest, in the late 70s and early 80s, the guys did not want to go to the VA.
What about more informal forms of therapy? I've talked to veterans who got into woodworking or, some other pursuit where it's
John
almost
was a
meditative.
drummer.
They keep their hands busy and their mind is, free.
It didn't work for him, but John was a drummer.
A drummer.
Yes.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we had a full drum set in our in our dining room, along with my piano and guitars. So, but no, the only time I ever saw John fully relaxed is when we were at the coast, at the water. And this would have been the Pacific Northwest coast. A little different than the Virginia Beach kind of coast.
Yeah, well, I live in the Pacific Northwest.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I know
And
this
that's
coastline
the
very
only
well. It's stunning, right? I'm assuming you're talking about maybe Oregon beaches.
California, North California beaches,
Mm.
Oregon. He actually lived in Moss Beach, California for a while. But they are just stunning beaches, and you can't, because of the rocky coasts and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so that was, he found peace there.
He was at peace there. Yeah, he didn't, and alone. Basically, when we would go up, we would stay at a place that was very peaceful, very quiet, not much around but nature.
So how long were you married to John?
We were married in 1984, and he passed away in 1994. So basically, almost 10 years.
And was his passing sudden, or was there
It was sudden. It was just unexpected. Well, unexpected.
so
Yes.
he hadn't really been sick as far as you know? I
He
mean,
never got sick, which was ironic. He just, his heart just stopped. He had so much plaque and such built up from the Agent Orange and the frustrations that he was always carrying inside, that his heart just stopped. I came home and he was gone on the floor. Another part of PTSD. I also just still see that very picture on the floor 30 some odd years later here.
yeah, sorry, I just can't even imagine. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for you. Um, did he talk about the circumstances of his exposure? I mean,
Oh, yes.
was he aware of it then?
Oh, yeah. We did not have children on purpose because of Agent Orange. He did not want to take the chance that a child would have spina bifida, or plus we were too busy enjoying each other's company.
Mm-hmm.
When he wasn't in a rage, he could be the sweetest, most wonderful man in the world, and very loving.
Is there an example of that stands out in your memory?
What of him being so loving?
Yeah, yeah. Is
Every
there
day. I mean, we never hung up the phone without saying, I love you. Never walked out the door without saying it. Just sitting on the couch, just snuggling up to each other, I guess, watching something we both enjoyed on television, laughing a lot. Courteous, opening a door for me every time every time we went somewhere, or just, I don't know how to describe it. He was married once before, and his brother said, yes, he was married before, but you were the apple of his eye. And that stuck with me for years. Still does, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound like he connected very much with other veterans, or maybe tried to share his PTSD experience with people who'd been through something similar. But what about you? Were you connected at all with, other
Yes,
wives of?
I was connected with a vet center.
Okay.
Um, and that's what made me want to become be a psychology degree. I wanted to understand it more than I wanted to, but I also had to get my feelings out as well. Um,
And the vet center provided an opportunity for you to do that?
yes.
Can you talk
Yes.
about that?
Well, they have programs for family members. I mean, this was a long time ago, so it was fairly new. But I would seek out other veterans to see their experiences, and so I made a call to the vet center to see if I could get counseling, and they approved it at that time. I know it was a newer thing. Now they do a lot of it, but back then they didn't do quite so much of it.
Hmm. So you met other wives, other family members who were dealing with
Some, not as many family members, as I kind of clung more to the veterans themselves.
hmm,
You know, I joined um, groups after John died and got more and more involved. But during that time, no, I had some friends, but I never had a lot of friends growing up. So my friends were few. And to be quite honest, I didn't talk about it to family and friends.
yeah.
You know, it was just something you didn't mention your family life and the bad things that go on. You just mentioned the good things that go on.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of good things to talk about. Um, how did getting to know these other veterans who were dealing with PTSD, how did that help you with John?
Different perspectives. Um, excuse me a minute. Y- As I said, they each had their own war, and each was in a different place with things like that. And you know, they could give you different perspectives on why someone would be feeling that way. And you know, I had gone back to college. I've been in college several times, but I had gone back to college. I was more older at the time, and more veterans were coming back to the colleges and such. So I got just, you know, hearing their stories and how they deal with things and such, and how I tried to deal with things with John, you know. Letting him get it off his chest was one of the things I learned. Don't try to sugarcoat it, just let him scream and yell and whatever he needs to do, bang a wall if he has to, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but that's, and by getting those other perspectives, helped me understand what he was going through more.
You mentioned that John had grown up an orphan, and you know, I talked to a lot of veterans who talk about the men they served with as their brothers, and in some cases, I talk to veterans who have actual brothers who they feel less close to than men they served with. You know,
Yeah.
for example, I talked to one veteran who grew up with a twin brother. They both served in Vietnam, not at the same time, because one went in right out of high school as an enlisted man. The other one went to Vietnam later as an officer out of college. So they were never there at the same time. But this man told me that, you know, he feels in some ways closer to the men he served with at Khe Sanh
Hmm.
than he does to his twin brother, which I found astounding. But anyway, all that is just sort of to lead up to the question of, you know, did John find meaningful connections with men he served with, and if so, did those connections last once they were home?
The people that he served directly with, no. But there was one fella that he did keep in touch with. They both went through, I mean, he talked him down from a very bad situation.
Wait, which one talked which one down?
John talked his friend down from a very bad situation where he was with a gun on a backyard hill. And
Hmm.
But he stayed close to him until I don't know if they drifted apart or the guy moved and they couldn't find each other for a while. But John, John was not close to anyone. But if someone told them that he fought in Vietnam and he talked to them, if we met somebody and they fought in Vietnam, he'd ask them 3 or 4 simple questions, and if they couldn't answer right, he'd get frustrated with them, because there were a lot of wannabes, what they call wannabes out there. But if he could tell that they were in Vietnam, then yes, he had an instant bond with them, and they had an instant bond with him. And he used to get very angry at those that would want to think they were Vietnam veterans. And there are guys out there that, you know, it was fashionable to be a Vietnam veteran at one point in time. And
Really?
well, yeah,
I mean, I
they
talked
call
to a
them
lot of
wannabe.
Vietnam veterans who say it was, it wasn't fashionable for them
No, I
to
mean,
actually
they
be
think,
Vietnam veterans.
I'm not sure that's the right word to use.
But I know what you mean. I know the kind of men you're talking about, men who want
Yes,
to be
yes,
more a part of something bigger than themselves than they actually were. And
yes.
where did John draw? I'm just curious. This is not for the interview and I won't use it, but where did John draw the line? Was it a question of actually having been in country, or was it a question of, well, if you were at, headquarters in Saigon, that doesn't count, or where did he draw the
Well, he
line?
did have a little bit about the REMFs, rear echelon MFs.
Gotcha. Okay.
They called them REMFs.
Okay. That's a new one for me. I appreciate knowing that one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So did he draw the line there? Was a rear
Not
echelon?
when he was in the States. Anybody who served in Vietnam, regardless of what they did their service and did their duty,
Mm,
and he would never hold that against them.
sure, because you don't get to pick what job you have.
Exactly.
Right. So you said he was not close to anybody. Obviously, with you being the exception, he was close to you. So,
And his
you
sister.
know, after nearly 10 years of marriage, you come home one day and find him on the floor with his heart stopped. What happened next? I mean,
I was in shock for a year.
yeah.
All I could do was put one foot in front of the other and walk.
And you kind of had to do this all by yourself, right? Because you said you didn't
For
share.
the first time in my life, I was alone.
Yeah. Well, you said that you hadn't shared any of this with friends or family, and John wasn't close to anybody.
This is really my first time sharing this.
So you carried all of that by yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess you had some contacts at the vet center maybe who helped you out.
Yes, yes. I had a counselor at the vet center, but
Where's John buried?
he's buried in Oakdale, Pennsylvania. We had moved back to that area of Pennsylvania. It's just it's outside of Pittsburgh where
And
he was born.
I'm curious why he would go back there if he had been an orphan and they didn't really have any. I mean, he had one sister.
He had fond memories
Oh,
of
okay.
Pennsylvania itself. Yeah, he had 2 sisters, one of which he never talked about. I didn't meet her until he died. Didn't even know he had her. He had 2 brothers. One was in Vietnam after him, who he had tried to say, tried to get him to go anywhere but Vietnam at the time. Um, Jimmy basically was a disabled veteran, and he felt responsible for his brother going there, and that always grated on him as well.
John felt like he was somehow responsible for Jimmy going to Vietnam.
Because he tried to talk him out of it every which way he could when he came back.
Okay. I mean, if he tried to talk him out of it, I mean, I don't know what more he could have done.
I know, but he always felt, I guess because it was his younger brother and
Hmm.
they all looked out for each other. There were 5 of them altogether.
I see. I see. So what do you remember about John's funeral?
Um, I remember that my brother-in-law, my two sister-in-laws, and my niece, my mother, all flew out from California. I remember one friend that he had met there, and we had a video store at the time, so the partner and that was it at the funeral. And I remember having to borrow money from my parents to bury him, and it was the first time in my life I'd ever had to ask for something, which was hard for me. Um,
So the forgive me for not knowing this, but I guess I'm a little surprised that the Army didn't. You said he was buried in a military cemetery.
Back of a small cemetery. Yeah, at the time, you have to realize I'd never been through any of this.
So
Never.
you didn't know what resources were available to you.
I didn't know what, having lost a second husband, I was more informed, but I was being led. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, it's all kind of a blur.
Hmm.
I remember walking into the florist and the lady said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Is it your father?" And I said, "No, it was my husband." And she broke down and cried. I remember things like that, but when we were asked, when they asked me what I wanted on the headstone, I don't remember if I picked it or if my mother picked it. I just don't remember. I was surrounded by, I guess, the three people I knew the best: my sister-in-law, my niece, and my mom. And I don't know.
And they carried you through that experience.
They carried me through that. I was in my 30s. I was so young, you
Mhm.
wouldn't, and it was so sudden. It wasn't like it was expected, it just happened.
How long did you stay in Pennsylvania after John died?
A year, and then I got a job down in Washington, D.C. Oh, I have a friend, a very, very good friend, who was the maid of honor at my second wedding, who we worked in California together, and she lived in Maryland, in Kensington, Maryland, which wasn't far. And I remember my other friend that we all worked together called her, and she drove up. So she was actually there and stayed with me as well, Audrey.
What's her
And
name?
Audrey,
Okay.
and she and I have been friends since the 70s.
And is
So
she the reason why you went down to the DC area?
is she basically, yes. Because I had a friend and I did not want to go back to California.
Hmm. So what year is this when you arrive in DC or in the area of DC?
1994.
1994.
Yeah.
And you said you got a job down there?
Yes, that's when you could go in the Washington Post, find a job, and actually get work. So I came down here a couple of times, and when John first passed away, I wanted to go back to California to see my parents. My friend Audrey took me to, I'm remembering more about the funeral. It was supposed to be a big storm coming in with a lot of snow and such. So he was basically buried fast on a Wednesday. Audrey took me back to her house in Gaithersburg at the time for a week. And that's how I got connected with the wall. I went down to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and met a volunteer who laughed with me, cried with me, hugged me. And just helped me get through what had just happened to me. And so that whole week I kept going down to the wall. It was my first experience ever going to the wall.
What can you tell me about that volunteer? Do you remember the name?
I think it was Ted.
And was Ted a Vietnam veteran himself?
I can't remember if Ted Baxter was or not. I know he was a caring, loving person and has since passed on. He's one of the first volunteers we honored. And yeah, but he got me to volunteer down there just by being him. And I felt closer to John every time I was down there. But that kept drawing me down there. And I kept meeting, you know, other veterans and other family members and such. And then I flew off to California and went back to Pittsburgh, looked for a job, and got a job that August coming down to DC.
So this is August of 94?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
John
you had,
died in February of 94.
right.
So I
So
could only remain there a few months. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm just trying to make sure I get the timeline straight. Did you go to the wall and meet Ted Baxter before you moved to DC or after you moved?
Yes.
I
No,
see.
the same 3 days after, 2 days after I buried my husband.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Man, that is, I mean, I can't imagine what that must have been like for you to see that memorial for the first time 2 days after you buried your husband.
I can tell you it felt healing. I can also tell you that now I have 5 names that I'm familiar with on the wall. One of them was from my hometown. One of them was from the second place I grew up. I grew up also in Davis, California. And I never knew him, but I knew his sister. His sister and I are still friends. I knew the family. I knew his parents and everybody. So I dated a man after that whose brother is on one of the panels. So, and then I know, yeah, I don't know. It felt like I needed to be there. Like John was there, but his name wasn't there, but he was there.
So you moved to DC, you got a job. Did you continue to volunteer at the wall?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How many times a week do you think you were down there?
Oh, back then, oh my God, every single day
Wow.
after work.
Wow.
And I would stay sometimes till 2, 3 in the morning because I just couldn't sleep. You know, we didn't really count our hours back then very well. We wrote them down in a book. Now they have to go online to do it, and I still don't get that much. I go down anyway, and they just don't have the hours. I couldn't go down in the daytime much because I didn't really want to deal with the tourists, but found out that a lot of the veterans and people who really had a connection to the wall came down at night. So I preferred being there at night for the first, I don't know, 3 or 4, 5 years.
How did you meet Paul?
Well, he was a volunteer at the wall. And I don't know, I guess it was 96. And I had honored John through the In Memory program and found closure. And I was ready to start moving on, but not away from the wall. I mean, I would never go away from the wall. I will still be up there Memorial Day weekend this week, you know. But he finally started I guess we'd say hi and that, and we really didn't know each other. But one day he comes up and he stands next to me and he says, "Are you going to get to work yet?" And I said, "Yeah, when you give me a raise." He said, "Well, I'll give you 25%." And I said, "Well, honey, 25% of nothing is still nothing." And that's just how we talked the whole rest of our lives. But we were both healing. Paul was widowed about the same period of time I was widowed. And we just started talking and enjoying when we saw each other. And Paul asked me one 4th of July is what I consider our first date, Paul and I.
Of 96.
Of 96. This was before they cordoned off all of 4th of July. And of course, before they had no drinking on the mall and that. And it was absolutely packed, just person after person. And Paul comes up and he says, "You want to buy me lunch?" And I said, "Sure, come on, we'll go buy lunch." He said, "Come on, I got to go to my car first." He pulls out an ice chest that could feed the whole block. And he had a picnic basket. And, I mean, he had chicken he'd made and potato salad. So in essence, he really was buying me lunch.
Mhm.
And he, we sat out there, we had this big, huge picnic. We had food all day long. And Alison Krauss, excuse me, Alison Krauss is an artist that he really liked. And she was playing at the Sylvan Theater down. So we were going to go down, and he said, "You want to go down and see?" And I'd never heard of her before. I was in a different kind of music era or type of music. And then I got to love her, of course. But so I said, "Sure, we'll go down there." And I'm kind of the outgoing type, and I had the yellow shirt on and a yellow hat. And I said, we wanted to go down to the front of the stage. So I got my yellow hat and I got my yellow shirt, and he was behind me. And I said, "Excuse me, coming through, pardon me, coming through, yellow hat coming through, volunteer here, let's here." And we just kept walking and walking and walking all the way down to the front of the Sylvan Theater. And then because we were volunteers, they allowed us to go backstage. So that night, of course, we went back to the Washington Monument, and we sat on the Washington Monument and watched the fireworks fly. And we both felt like a couple of 16-year-old kids just trying to, we were both very nervous. We were both, but it was fun. And that was the way our whole life went.
Yeah. So let's flash back a little and talk about Paul's background. Where had he grown up?
Lanham, Maryland.
Mm-hmm. And was he a military brat? Did he get drafted or volunteer?
He volunteered. He went in 1964. He was Navy.
Mm-hmm.
He went in shortly after he graduated. He was in from 64 to 69. And he was a machinist mate. Mm-hmm. So he was down in the engine room.
So what portion of those 5 years were spent in Vietnam?
He did his tour of duty. Well, I believe 67, he went over with the USS Boston. And as they were getting ready to leave Vietnam, now the USS Boston was a heavy cruiser, a bigger ship. And as they were getting ready to leave Vietnam or off the shore or whatever, they came on board from a destroyer and said, "We need 2 volunteers. How about you and you?" How people volunteer in the military.
Right.
And he was transferred to a smaller destroyer and went back to Vietnam. So 67, he was on the USS Boston, and so 67 was his tour in Vietnam.
Okay.
And he was off the coast on the heavy cruiser, and then on the destroyer, they docked at the Mekong Delta.
Now, you mentioned earlier that he also had been exposed to Agent Orange, and I
Yeah.
think some of our listeners maybe don't understand how a blue water sailor would be exposed to a
Mhm.
chemical defoliant. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, okay, first of all, when you spray, it doesn't stop at the water line. Let's be honest, the winds blow it and such. These men, even though they had a desalinization system on the ships and such, they bathed in it, they drank it, they, cooked in it. You brush your teeth in it, I'm sorry, but it still gets into the system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because they actually were docked at the Mekong Delta, they were closer to it.
Yeah, they're right at the mouth, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it qualified him for being a service connected.
When did you first start to see effects from that?
It started with him when he found out he was severely diabetic all of a sudden.
And was this before or after he married you?
Um, very shortly before. So I'd say less than a year before he married me. And so diabetes. Well, my father had diabetes. People get older, they get diabetes. I had diabetes as a child, but you don't think about it and how diabetes can take other turns. Diabetes can actually kill you, but he had heart problems, which didn't, things like the things that didn't run in the family, but eventually became presumptive for Vietnam service in Agent Orange. I just watched him go from being diabetic to having a heart attack to having a stroke to losing an eye to having 2 back surgeries to having prostate cancer to having renal failure and congestive heart failure.
Over what kind of a time frame are we talking about?
About 17 years.
17 years. Hmm.
Yeah. It took him very slowly.
Forgive me if this is an impossible question, but having gone through what you went through with John, how did that enable you or not, prepare you or not, to go through what you went through with Paul?
Nothing can really prepare you. I can't say that that's a word I would use. Age plays a big difference in it as well. I mean, I was in my 30s. I'm 64 now. That I watched my strapping, vibrant husband, Paul, go down to being someone who couldn't, I had to, unfortunately, I couldn't take care of him anymore. He had to go into a nursing facility. To watch him go, from this gentleman and he was also a gentleman, the old days, and extremely loving. Oh, we had a very fun relationship. Laughing, teasing each other, doing things like that just went away. Just the last 6 months of his life were just the most debilitating of his life. Comments like, "I'm tired of being tired." Someone who cooked every day, cooked the meals, did the laundry for me. Yeah, I was not domestic in any way, shape, or form at that time, to becoming another caregiver. Because with John, I was kind of a caregiver. I had to get him to do the things that needed to be done. With Paul, I became a caregiver for, had to make sure he got his pills taken, got to make sure that he, just watching him deteriorate or like that, I couldn't do it again.
I mean, the second time through, though, you were more informed about resources that were available to you, you know,
Yes.
through the vet center or through the VA.
Yeah.
I mean, how much did that help? Just knowing the landscape a little better.
What helped was I told him not to drop his claim. I kept pushing him. I said, they're going to push you so hard that you're going to want to give up
Hmm.
or die. That's that's how the VA works.
Deny, deny, deny.
Deny until, and then every time that something went wrong with him, even though he was denied until until they got to the blue water, some ships went on, some didn't. He only made it through the USS Auld. It wasn't until much later that they have blue water navy. But because the USS Auld was the destroyer that was parked at the Mekong, docked at the Mekong Delta, that's what got him finally. And we kept appealing and appealing and appealing and appealing and appealing. That was one of the things. I would not let him let that claim drop. I would push him to that. Pushed him to his doctor's appointments. Made sure that he because diabetes, as I knew, could, you really need to keep track of that kind of stuff. Fortunately, the VA that we went to, the several that we went to, were good. They had good doctors and that, but so many of the men had bad experiences. Like John never wanted to go to a VA. I kind of lost my train of thought. Where were we? What was the question again? If you could repeat it.
No, you answered it beautifully. I was talking
Mhm.
about how knowing the landscape a little better the second time through, knowing the resources that were available, knowing the processes, knowing, for example, not being surprised by the fact that you're going to be denied the first 11 times you apply. One thing we haven't talked about, Cyndy, is we've talked about John's PTSD and John's Agent Orange. We've talked about Paul's Agent Orange exposure. We've not talked about Paul's PTSD. How did that manifest itself?
His wasn't so much, he could never concentrate, like he remembers when they were throwing grenades over the side of the ships that he was on, and him being in the hole. He could, he fortunately did not have it as severely as John had it at all. Paul's was more mild. It more toyed with his concentration, his ability to. He was completely opposite. He did not want conflict. He couldn't deal with conflict. His thing was to just go away, let it go, forget it, drop it. I can't deal with that. And that's why I say when I pushed him to keep doing that. But like I said, his was a lot more mild than John's, and it manifested in different ways.
Easier for you to deal with?
Yes, to be honest.
And when did Paul pass away?
January 19th, 2021.
That's just like a year and a half ago.
Yes.
And how long had you two been married? 17
21
years?
and a half years.
How many?
21 and a half years.
21 and a half years. And you said that his deterioration was a 17-year process. So you had a few years there at the beginning before it began?
Yes, and even during the deterioration, we still got to do things. I mean, the last big thing that we got to do that was enjoyable was I had a best friend whose birthday was my birthday, and he was my oldest and dearest friend, and he was living in a trailer, boondocking places. And we decided we wanted to go out to Sedona, Arizona. So we took this big, long 3-week trip out to Sedona, Arizona, and then met with my best friend for a week and turned around and came back. And so me being able to get him out and him being able to enjoy, but of course at that time he was with a walker and couldn't walk much, and that we knew his kidneys were failing. So we tried to do as much as we could in the time period we could before he had to go on dialysis. And I will say that the 6 months between the June of 2020 and January of 21, the dialysis took him down so fast, it made me cry, just to watch him have to go through that. We were in the hospital many times. There were times in the hospital that I was very forceful and said, I am the decision maker here, because Paul was not good at remembering things. I always had to go to the doctor with him to help. I retired early. I retired at the age of 55 so that I could do these things, go to the doctors with them and such. To be able to know what the doctor said and how they said it. And so, yes, we were aware his kidneys were failing. Did we wait too long to go on dialysis? It's possible. Am I going to second guess myself? Absolutely not. I just wanted to enjoy the time we had together. Because of COVID, I couldn't see him when he went into the nursing facility. However, they wanted me to be there at the dialysis center with him while he was having dialysis because he was agitated, so he would pull the needle out. So if I was there, he was less agitated. I was there the day he died. I'm the last person he saw. I was holding his hand for 3 hours and talking with him during that whole situation of the dialysis. It was when they were transporting him from had to use a lift to transport him from the chair to the gurney to take him back to the nursing facility. And I'm the last person he saw. And I thank God for that every day.
Well, Cyndy, you've spent half your life you've spent married to veterans with issues that are, direct result of their experience in Vietnam.
That's correct. And I'd do it all over again.
What advice do you have for family members who have veterans like Paul and John in their lives?
If it gets to be too much, seek outside help. There is help available. Try to get your veteran, especially post-traumatic stress. Try to get your veteran. That's the hardest thing in the world to do, is to go somewhere. I couldn't get John to go anywhere. So I had to learn ways to cope with it while I was with him so that I didn't take it personally. Seek help for yourself. Go to the VA and get as much help as they will give you. Don't ever let them tell you, keep it, be a pain in their butt. Seek out other people who are going through what you're going through. Being a caregiver is a very difficult thing to be. and it takes its toll physically and mentally on you. Try to get as much family involvement. If it wasn't for my stepchildren, which I call my children, Paul's kids, I'd be a basket case. So, try to mend fences with family, whatever. Life's too short. Enjoy as much of it as you can.
Mm. Yeah, I think something really important that you said there, right? I mean, I don't know about for most people. For me, if I had a veteran like that in my life, I would be consumed with finding resources for that veteran. What you're saying is there are also resources available for you as the family member,
Absolutely.
and it's
Use
really
them
important.
because you're going to want them. You're going to feel like you're going to learn you're not alone, that we all go through this. There are, yes, especially those who are dealing with the decline of their husbands and have to go from being a partner to a caregiver to a widow. It's just, and in today's day with the girls and guys coming back, the more resources are now available than they were back when I was with John. A lot more resources. You have to take care of yourself, because if you don't, you can't really take care of your veteran.
All right. Well, just a couple of minor housekeeping things. Can you tell me John's full name and his branch? I know you already said Army, but please say it again, and his rank.
John Carlin Hollander, U.S. Army, Spec 4.
Okay. And can you do the same for Paul?
Paul Crawford Stancliff, U.S. Navy, MM3.